Are you feeling overwhelmed by hormonal changes? If you're a woman, you're definitely not alone. More than 1,000 hormone disruptors are living rent-free in our environment right now. In our food, our water, the air we breathe, the clothes we wear, our skincare, and they all mess with our hormones. The good news is that we don't have to suffer through any of it anymore, because now we have Hormone Harmony, a formula made only with herbal ingredients that are shown to reduce hormonal symptoms in women of all ages. Hormone Harmony contains science-backed herbal extracts called adaptogens. Now here's the beauty of adaptogens. They help the body adapt to any stressors like chaotic hormonal changes that happen naturally throughout a woman's life. That's why Hormone Harmony is perfect for women of all ages who are struggling with life-disrupting symptoms such as PMS symptoms like irritability, moodiness, discomfort, or uncontrollable cravings, menopause symptoms like hot flashes or night sweats, racing thoughts, low moods, poor sleep and feeling tired all the time, occasional bloating and gas. Happy Mammoth, the company that created Hormone Harmony, is dedicated to making women's lives easier, and that means using only science-backed ingredients that have been proven to work for women. They make no compromises when it comes to quality, and it shows. For a limited time, you can get 15% off of your entire first order at happymammoth.com. Just use the code RAIN at checkout. That's happymammoth.com and use the code RAIN for 15% off today. This is Murder in the Rain, where each week Emily Rowney, Alicia Holland, and Josh McCullough tell true crime stories of the Pacific Northwest. Murder in the Rain contains graphic content. Listener discretion is advised. Last week, I told you about the murder of 21-year-old Terry Lee Foster, how she was found half nude in David Douglas Park in Vancouver on Christmas Eve, 1977. She had been strangled, raped, and dumped in a baseball field. At that time, her nearly 2-year-old daughter was in the custody of family friends Kenneth and Janice Haynes. Dennis David, the man in town from California to visit his sister Colleen, was at the top of the suspect list. Not just because his vehicle had tires that matched the tracks found at the scene, or that his face matched the description of the man who had gone to Terry's house in the middle of the night to take her to that party, or because he failed a polygraph test about murdering her, or how he had scratches on his face and neck. In addition to all of that damning yet not concrete evidence, he confessed he may have killed her, but he just forgot, and admitted that he was capable of committing murder and rape. Today, I'll discuss the other possible suspects, other crimes they were connected to, and share how you can help close this nearly 50-year-old cold case. Of all the potential suspects, Dennis David was one of the only to fail the polygraph, but he wasn't the only one given the exam. I want to make it very clear that I am not accusing anyone of murdering Terry. I am simply sharing the allegations and information found in the police report and other research. Sharing these possible suspects is an important aspect to Terry's story and could possibly motivate someone to come forward with information. These are all allegations and not accusations, official statements, or charges. Raymond Samuel Wilson, who went by Sam, was also given a polygraph, but he passed. Yes, there are two Sams in this story. Sam Wilson was Terry's ex-boyfriend. If I've laid out the timeline correctly, it appears Sam was not the long-term boyfriend Terry had moved in with in the summer of 77, but he was perhaps a boyfriend from after that breakup until about a month before her death. There were some concerns surrounding Sam Wilson. He was rumored to be connected to, if not a member of a local motorcycle club or gang. Investigators looked into those ties, but nothing came of it. During his polygraph interview, Sam claimed to have not seen Terry since November 11th, well over a month before her death. However, witnesses would claim that they had seen Terry and Sam interacting just a week before she had died. Investigators pieced together that those witnesses were correct and the two had interacted more recently than the 11th. It was alluded Terry had enticed Sam, possibly engaging in or implying that there would be sexual activity before she began to ridicule him. The witnesses didn't hear or see that portion of the interaction, but through a wall, it was reported they could hear Sam yell threats at Terry for mocking him. Because he passed the polygraph, Sam Wilson was eliminated as a suspect. On August 3rd, 2000, Raymond Samuel Wilson passed away. All right, here's a little one-off for you. Among the several people given a polygraph exam was Robert Malmberg. It was learned Robert had been contacted by Terry the night of the murder. Between her arrival time from the pub around 2 and her departure before 2:30, she made a phone call, and it was supposedly to Robert. Because of that, he was brought in for an exam. Robert admitted that he knew several of the key players in the case, but denied knowing Terry. However, when a cold case detective revisited the case, all he found was the scheduled date for the polygraph, which was October 12, 1978, but no documentation as to if it transpired or what the results were. It also seems very strange to me that this Robert guy would know possibly the entire family that lived there, but not Terry, who was the one who allegedly called him within an hour or two of her murder. It would be great to know if there was any information regarding his part of the case, if he was given the exam, what the results were, if it even happened. But we'll just have to move on to the next one. Dennis Manning, not to be confused with Dennis David, was also on the possible suspect list. In a later interview with a cold case detective, Dennis Manning said that he had been introduced to Terry through his cousin, Sue Samsel. Terry and Dennis met in Oregon before she moved to Vancouver, and then they began dating. Dennis was the boyfriend Terry had moved out of Jean Ann's home to move in with. They only lived together for a short time, though it had first been reported that Terry had left Jean's to live with a long-term boyfriend. Dennis claimed the two had only dated for about a week and a half. If that was the case, that would explain why the living arrangement did not last very long.
So did you say earlier there are two Sams? And
Yes.
there's also a Sue Samsel?
Yes.
All right.
And to be 21 again, to just move in with your boyfriend of a week and a half.
Oh my gosh.
Like, you know what? This is a good idea, actually. After the breakup, Dennis remained friends with Terry, but found her drama, his words, to be exhausting. He explained that the drama was, quote, everything, how she wanted to party. Terry's idea of partying, according to Dennis, involved drinking, drugs, sexual activities, and, quote, anything, probably meaning substance, she could get her hands on. Fleeting was also a word used to describe Terry's lifestyle. Dennis claimed that he would see her about once a week after the breakup, on the occasions that she would randomly show up at his home, usually in the middle of the night. Girlfriends were often in tow, and he claimed that she was looking to party. On those occasions, Dennis did not let her into his house. Dennis would go on to say that he did know of Fawn, Terry's daughter, but thought she was living with her grandparents. He didn't think Terry was working and didn't know how she earned income. Often strapped for cash, she had been known to borrow money from Dennis. Sometimes Dennis would seek Terry out to try and get paid back the money he loaned her, which she would do as often as she could. Dennis couldn't recall if she was indebted to him at the time of her death. Dennis was the one who reported to the detectives that he did not feel Terry had been participating in sex work or anything of that nature, but he did feel that she had a peculiar situation going on with cars. Terry was, according to Dennis, always cruising around in a different car. Last he knew, she was driving a 77 Maverick or a Mazda pickup, which I didn't think of before, and I don't remember if those cars were listed, but I'm curious if the police even checked her car as the vehicle that had dumped her. Because I think,
Oh, like someone used her own car?
Yeah, possibly. I wonder if they checked that.
They had to have, right? I mean, that's
optimistic for 77.
That's true. Nowadays.
In this case.
Nowadays, I feel like that would be eliminated.
Yeah, I didn't see anything mentioned, but I would hope that they were able to check that. Dennis was brought in for a polygraph on December 28th. Not only was he looked at as a suspect since he was the ex-boyfriend, but he was the cousin of Sam Manning, one of the last people to see Terry alive. During the polygraph, he was given the same questions as Dennis David. Did Dennis Manning see Terry Foster later on Friday night after seeing her that morning at his mother's home? There weren't details about that supposed interaction, but I'm assuming Terry had stopped by to see Dennis, possibly for the holiday, maybe to borrow money. And did Dennis suffocate Terry Foster or block her breathing to cause her death? To both questions, he responded no, and he passed the polygraph. unlike Dennis David. In 2010, cold case detectives reached out to Dennis Manning. Dennis was open to speaking with them, so detectives went to his home. They asked him about Terry's other ex, Sam Wilson, her roommate's son, Kevin, and Dennis's cousin, Sam Manning. Dennis talked about having met Kevin through cousin Sam and how he had seen Kevin, Terry, and Sam together on occasion, but they never attended one of his house parties. Seeing as no one at Terry's place recognized the man who claimed to be Dennis, who stopped by at 1 a.m., it left several options as to who that had been. Was it Dennis David, who was staying with his sister and had admitted to going to the house? He also admitted to being intoxicated and not having a great memory, so was that a false memory? Or was someone using the name Dennis as a cover? Or perhaps it had been Dennis Manning, the ex-boyfriend. He could have been looking to get his money back, or maybe he wanted to party and followed up on the alleged threats from the days prior. Kevin, the only person besides Terry who would have recognized Dennis Manning, was already gone. When asked if it had been him, Dennis Manning said, yeah, it could have been. He, too, had the same memory and alcohol issues as Dennis David. So we have two Dennises saying they might have been the Dennis that went to the house looking for Terry, saying they were Dennis.
That is so weird.
So I do give the investigators a little bit of the benefit of the doubt there with how complicated the names of this case are. It's a lot of clarifying to do. Dennis Manning said that at that time of his life, he was drinking heavily, so he couldn't remember if he had gone to Terry's house or not. His only defense was that 1 a.m. was, to him, peak party time, and he would have been at a bar, possibly his go-to place, Orchard's Tavern on 4th Plain Boulevard. Because only good stuff happens at 1 a.m. at the bar.
Yep.
While on the subject of 1977, Dennis told detectives he could tell he was being considered a suspect and that it upset him as he didn't feel he was being treated fairly and the cops weren't working the case as they should have to find the real killer. The Dicks explained to him that there was another Dennis in the picture, which could have led to confusion or the need to clarify via investigations. They had to sort out which Dennis was which, costing the investigation precious time. Dennis consented to a recorded interview, and he provided oral swabs and hair samples for DNA testing. Investigators confirmed that Dennis had been the one to introduce Terry to Kevin. Through that meeting, Terry found her place to stay and also met Sam Manning, Dennis's cousin, and Kevin's friend. Sam did not fit the description of the Dennis who stopped by that night, and he was friends with the family, who all would have known him. But he was with Terry in the final hours of her life, and he had an alarming history of his own. As far as anyone knew, the sequence of events from the 23rd took place just as Sam and Kevin had reported. They picked Terry up from Kevin's father's house, dropped her off at Little John's pub, picked her up around 2, and took her home. The cold case detective that reviewed the case in the early aughts did not find any report regarding an interview with Sam Manning. Was it lost to time, or did the police not bother to question one of the last people known to have been with Terry? There was a document that cleared Sam as a suspect because he had passed a polygraph. I don't have more on this report to go into, but there was mention that at some point Sam had picked up some teenage girls near Garrison Square, which is located next to David Douglas Park. During that ride, they all discussed the dead woman who had been found. As shady as that sounds, it doesn't seem like anything came from that interaction. I'm guessing those girls were maybe tracked down or they went to police or something. I don't know why they would know of that conversation, but nothing came from it.
That sounds likely that they were interviewed,
Yeah.
ruled out,
Yeah.
and then there was like rumor about what happened because they probably told someone that they were talking about it.
Oh, for sure.
I know I would.
Yeah. Or like, hey, so this guy picked us up right by where this happened, and then that's all he was talking about.
And then I'm at school like, guys, you'll never believe what happened this weekend.
Yeah,
I
seriously.
was interviewed by the hottest police officer.
So if anyone has to come today to like talk to me in the middle of class, like that's what I'm doing.
He's
okay?
probably going to ask me out. We were flirting the whole time.
In 1977, Sam Manning was a soldier at Fort Lewis. In January of that year, he was busted for not only driving while intoxicated, but for doing so as a minor, seeing as he was only 19 years old. He was held instead of paying the $300 bail. His eventual guilty plea would earn him a suspended license, a $200 fine, and 7 days in jail. January of the following year, Sam would be charged with driving on a revoked license. In March, the now 20-year-old would catch charges for third-degree assault, disorderly conduct, and minor in possession. Interestingly, by 1978, Sam, now 21, and Kevin, 18, seemed to have joined forces, but not for good. In January, they were both arrested and charged with third-degree theft and third-degree possession of stolen property. In March, the newest charges were third-degree assault, minor in possession of alcohol, disorderly conduct, and Kevin earned additional charges of reckless driving, driving a non-registered vehicle, unsafe tires, and possession of cannabis. So I think that's an important fact that by the following year after the murder, Kevin and Sam, who were the ones that drove her that night, are now breaking and entering, stealing things, assault.
Escalating.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, they're already teamed up. And again, this is not an accusation. It's just, I hope that was really looked into because you have two young guys who know where this person lives and know that she's leaving. Could they have seen her on the road and decided to do something? You know, it's just
Saw an opportunity.
Yeah, there are just so many elements, and she was just surrounded by a lot of not great dudes.
On the alternative, did they accidentally do something, purposely do something, and then we're like, now we live a life of crime, you know?
Oh, right.
Rather than it be an escalation.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Be kind of an origin story.
Yeah, because it's not that far of a reach to say these two young guys, they had left. Maybe they went back to the house or they were in the neighborhood and saw her walking. They're like, girl, we'll just give you a ride.
Mm-hmm. And then something
happens and then they panic and go leave her in the park.
Exactly.
I don't think that's unreasonable to play out to say, well, let's exclude that then if that didn't happen. 1989 was a big year for Sam. In June, he was charged with driving with a suspended license. In October, his girlfriend gave birth to their son. It seemed fatherhood may have forced the 31-year-old to grow up, as his name was no longer in the paper for his arrests, but for the birth of his second son in 1993. Those couple of years were just a short layover in the land of good behavior for Sam. In 1994, Sam and his wife Kelly were separated. In 1995, he was now the father to 3 children, aged 5, 2, and 6 months. And in March 1995, his name was once again in the papers, this time for a crime even worse than drunk driving. On Tuesday, March 14th, 1995, 62-year-old Orville Maynard Shipp arrived at his home just before 5 p.m. and found his 28-year-old daughter distraught. The woman, who we will call Ashley, told her father that she had just been raped. This hadn't been an attack from a stranger breaking in. It was at the hands of a close family friend, now 37-year-old Sam Manning. Sam and Orville had been longtime family friends, so when Ashley told her father Sam had raped her, he couldn't believe it. Orville called the police before he and his wife took Ashley to the hospital. She was not found to have any physical injuries. There were special circumstances surrounding these allegations, as it didn't appear to have been a rape by force, as in Sam attacked Ashley. This was a rape via the inability to give consent. Ashley was 28 years old, but she had developmental delays that gave her the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. So when Sam was alone with her in her parents' home, he lured her into a bedroom. Once there, he had intercourse with her, but she was not mentally able to give consent or understand what was transpiring. And no, Longview Daily News 1995, Ashley was not seduced. When Orville learned what happened and that it had been at the hands of his close friend, he wanted to teach Sam a lesson. He wasn't going to kill him. He just wanted to scare the living daylights out of him.
Reasonable.
Right, which he probably accomplished when he pulled up to Sam's home, got out of his car, and approached Sam as he looked back at Orville from the front seat of his vehicle. Orville held up his .32 caliber rifle and fired 4 shots at Sam. As the shots rang out, Sam bounced around like a rubber ball, trying to avoid being struck. Sam didn't need to try so hard. Orville wasn't trying to kill him or even hurt him. He was angry and wanted him scared. This was proven by the fact that he was so close to the car that he could have taken Sam out if he had really wanted to. Orville said, "I missed him on purpose," and that he regretted what he had done, having lost his temper when he came home and, quote, "My daughter told me she got raped."
I think it'd be hard to regret that.
Hard to regret shooting at someone?
Yeah, because it's like, I didn't hurt him.
I think that maybe that was said for courts.
Yeah.
Like,
I guess.
Yes, I'm very remorseful. The guy isn't dead, and I kind of got back at him for doing that. So
I'm going to be honest. I don't know how I'd react if I came home and found out that happened to my daughter.
I don't know how he would have the control to not shoot him.
Mm-hmm. That's why I don't have guns in my house.
Right? I think of that sometimes with cases, and I'm like, if that happened to one of the kids in my life,
Mm-hmm.
I would take that person apart with nail clippers and I wouldn't regret it. So,
Exactly.
so kudos to Orville for the self-control.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Police responded to the calls of shots fired. I'm not sure if the call came from Orville himself, but it wouldn't surprise me. When they arrived, Orville was calm, unarmed, and cooperative, though he was clearly upset about what had happened to Ashley. When informed of her estranged husband's arrest for second-degree rape, Kelly said, "He wouldn't do nothing like that. Whatever it is, it's all mixed up. It's not the truth. It don't really sound like Orville either, and I know Sam wouldn't rape." Sam's bail was set at $25,000. Orville was arrested and charged with attempted murder. By the next day, his bail was lessened from $100,000 to $50,000, and the charge was changed to first-degree assault. It's almost like the court realized that some vigilante justice is valid. Topical. By early April, Orville pled guilty to a charge of second-degree assault. When processing the sentence, the judge said, "I can't imagine a more extreme case of provocation." In May, Orville was sentenced to 30 days in jail, a more lenient sentence than even the minimum for the charge. He could have been given even less time under the first offender option, but since old Orville had a robbery charge from 1965, he was ineligible. Being the pre-digital age, the courts seem to have missed that Orville had several other charges in his past. Starting back in 1952, the then 19-year-old was arrested for automobile theft while home on leave from the Army. And here's where I apologize for the rabbit hole newspapers.com took me down. Here, I thought I'd be sharing the stories of the possible suspects in Terry Foster's murder, but now I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent about the crazy criminal history of Orville Shipp, the man who shot at rapist Sam Manning, who was one of the last people with Terry and the cousin of Terry's ex. Everyone following?
Nope, definitely not.
Okay, so in 54, Orville, 22, attacked a 65-year-old man with a wrench and robbed him. Running out of gas, Orville flagged down a ride. When Axel Neeson stopped and started to get out of his car to see if he could help, Orville beat him on his head with a lug wrench. This nearly killed Axel, causing him to lose sight in his left eye and breaking several bones in his face. Orville wouldn't be caught for the attack until the next year when he was stopped for a traffic violation. Perhaps his deeds were weighing too heavy on him, and as he was being taken to the jail, apparently it wasn't that minor of a traffic violation, Orville broke down and confessed. Not only had he been responsible for the attack on Axel, but he had robbed a former boss. As he told it, Orville stopped by the honey stand of beekeeper Julian Tobert, whom he had been an employee of for a whopping 2 weeks, 4 years previously. After a brief chat, Orville left, followed shortly by Julian. The honey stand was unmanned, as some of you may see to this day. I know of a few neighborhoods with honey stands or flower stands. They have a spot for money to be left, and based on the honor system, people can help themselves to a product and leave cash. In 25 years, Julian's stand had never been off by even a penny. That was until the day Orville came by. Upon Julian's return, he found that he had been robbed and knew the culprit was Orville. Orville confessed to robbing the stand as he confessed to attacking Axel. It seems any charges related to the attack of Axel were dropped when Orville pled guilty to the robbery charges, earning him a sentence of 30 years with a minimum of 5. While working on a prison farm, Orville and 2 other inmates escaped. It was believed the men took off in a yellow pickup truck for the Wallowa Mountains in Joseph, Oregon, which, side note, if you have not been, I cannot recommend enough. It is truly one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen, and it feels like you're in another country. Strangely, the reports about the escape state that he was serving 5 years for rape. This was very incorrect, and in fact, Orville would later tell the police that the other man that he had escaped with, they had gone their separate ways once Orville learned that he had been serving time for rape, and he, quote, "don't associate with that kind of person." After going out on his own, ditching his rapist co-convict, Orville wound up in California where he earned more charges relating to car theft before his wanted status was cleared. Orville would get hit with another auto theft charge in Oregon in 1962. After the conviction related to shooting at Sam, Orville served his time and forfeited all of his firearms. Or at least he did at that time. Fast forward to 1999, and Orville, now 66, was arrested for negligent driving and for being a felon in possession of a firearm when he and his car were found in a ditch. As a police cruiser passed on the road, the officer noted a vehicle in a ditch. Strangely, there were no occupants, so they used the registration to learn that the car belonged to Orville Shipp. Going to his home, police met with his wife, who told them that he had been out, but he had not come home yet. She was then taken to the scene of the accident, but there was no sign of Orville. That was until a passing driver stopped to tell the police that he just saw a man lying in that ditch, but further down the road. Arriving at that location, Mrs. Shipp and the officers found Orville lying there. He was conscious, but barely, and not because of an accident. There was a pungent smell of alcohol surrounding Orville, along with a rifle and spent shells. When police asked what happened, he explained that he had been driving, crashed, and he was trying to walk home but could barely stand straight. So he pulled out his rifle and fired 4 calling for help shots. Those did not work, but his possession of the gun earned him a new charge of first-degree negligent driving and felon possessing a firearm. Found guilty for the lesser charge of driving while intoxicated, he was sentenced to 30 days in jail, ordered to undergo chemical dependency evaluations and treatment, and fined $925. Those 30 days did not teach Orville any kind of lesson, and in 2002, he was in trouble again, now 69 years old. It was reported that on the morning of March 19th, a woman was sitting in her car at her child's bus stop. It's unclear if the child was still in the car waiting or if they had caught the bus and the woman just hadn't left yet, but it seemed Orville thought the woman was on his property, so he came out of his home wielding a long-barreled handgun and screamed at her to leave. He was booked on charges of first-degree unlawful possession of a firearm, found guilty as he was indeed a felon in possession of a firearm, and he was sentenced to 26 months in prison. It's unclear if Orville Shipp was serving the remaining months of that sentence when he passed away in March of 2004. So I'm sorry for that tangent, but once I saw all of this info about Orville, because at first I'm like, oh my gosh, this father goes to the guy who raped his daughter and shoots at him. What a hero, doing the right thing, finding justice in his own hands. And then it's like, oh, he would have done that for a lot less of a reason. He beat a man with a lug wrench. He's maybe not an awesome person. So all of that takes us back to Sam Manning. For the third-degree rape of Ashley, 37-year-old Sam pleaded guilty and received a 41-month sentence. The original charges had been second-degree rape and indecent liberties, but the agreed-to plea lessened those charges. Sam acknowledged in a letter that he had had intercourse with Ashley and did so, quote, despite a lack of consent clearly expressed by her. He also admitted to another occasion where he had coerced her into sexual activities. Thanks to the note scribbled on the side of one of the investigative documents that read, convicted of rape, dishonorably discharged from Fort Lewis, I was able to learn all about the victimization of Ashley, the long, strange history of Orville, and that Sam, like Dennis David, seemed to be capable of rape, which certainly leaves me wondering, had he also been capable of murder back in 1977? I don't know, but again, I think it's worth discussing. What are the odds that a woman is raped and murdered, and 20 years later, one of the last people with her is a rapist? I mean, I know we know the odds are higher than we like to think, but you know what I mean? What are the chances of that? And it should be looked at. It's also easy to make up a scenario in which Dennis, the ex-boyfriend, and his cousin Sam, the law-breaking soldier, ended up in cahoots or something. This is not based on evidence, just pointing out that there's more than enough to warrant a much deeper look into both of them. John Paulette was not necessarily a suspect, but he was close enough to the case to be questioned and interviewed. John was, at the time of the murder, married to Colleen, Dennis David's sister. John told cold case detectives in 1988 that he believed Dennis's glasses had been broken the night of the party, but he didn't recall seeing any injuries to his face. He remembered police had come to his home and seized an unknown person's pair of panties. You'll recall Colleen had found a pair of panties on the couch that did not belong to her, so she placed them in her brother's luggage, assuming that a lady friend had come over. During this time, Colleen continued to deny even having gone to the Edelweiss Company party or that Dennis had broken glasses or injuries. John was not so keen on the idea of Dennis's innocence, though, especially since, after Dennis learned of Terry's death, Dennis would say things to John like, "What if I did do it? I'm not sure what happened," and "Could I have done it?" along with statements about blacking out. Another report listed Gregory Morinville as a possible suspect. There weren't details in the documents. Once again, a huge thank you to Gray Hughes Investigates for providing them. The only note I found stated that Gregory had been listed as a suspect due to his polygraph results, which, if someone failed the polygraph, and it sounds like he maybe did, you would think there would be some sort of information about him and his connection to Terry, or why he was even brought in the first place. I couldn't find so much as a newspaper report about the guy, but it appears that he may have failed the polygraph, and it's unknown if he remains on the suspect list. Now to my final major suspect. As you'll recall, Kenneth and Janice Haynes had been friendly with Terry Foster, babysitting her daughter Fawn. They became full-time caretakers when Terry lost custody of Fawn and the Haynes became her foster parents. Yes, this case is so redundant, there is a foster family fostering a baby foster. In 1977, it was documented that Kenneth was interviewed. The only question I saw confirmed was regarding the last time he had seen Terry, and nothing came of that interview. In 1984, Kenneth Haynes, the adopted father to Fawn for the last 7 years and other children since, was arrested and charged with indecent liberties. I don't know that I had heard of indecent liberties prior to this case, and for those unfamiliar like I was, indecent liberties is defined as when someone takes sexual liberties or has unwanted sexual contact with another person, as in the case with Sam Manning, who was also charged with indecent liberties. The elements that lead to that charge, differing from rape, are that the person charged had forcible sexual contact, which I believe excludes intercourse as that would warrant a rape charge, without the victim's consent, and there is an element of forcible compulsion, or the victim is unable to give consent due to mental or physical disabilities. So for Sam, it was the mental disability of Ashley, and in Ken's case, it is due to age. In 1984, a new batch of cold case detectives were looking into Terry's case, by then 7 years unsolved. It's unclear if Ken Haynes was on the suspect list before August of that year, but he certainly found himself there when he was arrested for those charges. The first count of indecent liberties came from knowingly causing a young neighbor girl and friend of Fawn's to, quote, have sexual contact with him when she was less than 14 years of age. The second charge was the same, but his actions were against his own adopted daughter, Fawn. So she has lost her mother at 2, no father in the picture, and adopted dad has, to some degree, sexually abused her. Arrested August 26th, he was held on $4,000 bail and pleaded not guilty to both charges. Amazingly, though not surprisingly, Kenneth was permitted supervised visits and phone calls with Fawn as long as his wife and their minister were present. Yes, I'm sure Fawn was just desperate for time with him. Ken was also allowed to have his wife and minister come for a 4-hour Thanksgiving dinner visit. In 1985, Kenneth changed his mind and pleaded guilty to a single charge of indecent liberties and claimed the abuse had only transpired from January through June 30th, 1984, which I find nearly impossible to believe that he just went on this 6-month thing, and that was the only time that had happened. So this deal allowed him to serve just 30 days in the Clark County Jail, followed by 5 years of probation. He was also ordered to undergo psychosexual and alcohol addiction treatment. It was reported that Ken and Fawn, who was also provided therapy to cope with the abuse, were both responding well to treatment. After 16 months, the doctors recommended that Ken be allowed to move back into the home with Janice and Fawn, with the caveats that he never be left alone with Fawn and that the doors would have locks for protection and privacy. On January 1st, 1990, Ken was dismissed from parole after serving his 5 years and paying off owed court fees. Once again, we have a man very close to the case and the victim involved in a heinous sexual crime. I know sexual assault doesn't equal murder, but if you're willing to sexually abuse your own adopted daughter, who's to say you aren't capable of committing a worse sexually driven crime? When Ken spoke with cold case detectives again in 2010, he told the detective that he was aware of the anger the mother of his other victim held toward him. He also explained that his behavior was due to him being in the midst of an alcohol and sex addiction at that time. That same detective informed Ken that he had been an alleged suspect. That wasn't surprising news. He always felt that he had been under the watchful eye of detectives since they had interviewed him. He was seen with the victim the day before, and he was in the care of the victim's child. It would have been pretty easy for someone to connect Terry's emotional state about not having Fawn for the holidays and a negative altercation between her and Ken. Or, since he had an in-house victim, maybe he wasn't keen on the idea of ever giving Fawn back to her mother. I just want to make it clear again, nothing along those lines is even alluded to in any of the documentation. It's just, in my opinion, he should be on that suspect list until he is totally cleared beyond a doubt. During that recorded interview in 2010, Ken said he learned of Terry's murder in the paper. He gave some details about the article he had seen, and police were able to corroborate its existence. There's kind of a lot of info about tracking down this article. It seemed to bear the weight of, well, if he said that he only saw it in the paper and we can find that exact article, he must not have done it, as if he couldn't have found the article after the fact. There were just several mentions of, I went to the library and I looked it up and I found it with the picture that he described. And it's like, right, but you can still murder someone the night before and see an article the next day. So that newspaper article existing doesn't exactly clear you. It was a bit foggy for Ken to remember his relationship with Terry from 30 years ago, but he knew that they hadn't had Fawn for long when Christmas came around in 77. He knew Terry had come by the house at least twice since they had Fawn, but his wife Janice had always been more social with Terry. Janice could not be interviewed as she had passed away from muscular dystrophy when she was 49 years old. Kenneth was asked directly if he had been responsible for Terry's death. He denied having anything to do with it. At the end of the 2010 interview, Kenneth provided oral swabs and hair samples for DNA testing. Kenneth Haynes has since remarried and lives in Southern Oregon. Now, back to Dennis David, my personal prime suspect. In February 1988, cold case detectives met again with Dennis David, this time at his home in Chico, California. Discussing the circumstances, the detectives reminded him to be honest. He recounted returning to his sister's home in Vancouver after stopping by Terry's house and leaving the message from Dennis. Going back to the house, he interacted with Colleen and his brother-in-law, John. The detectives asked about a portion of the night that he seemed to be omitting. After going to Terry's, returning to the party with broken glasses and a cut-up face. Dennis responded that he didn't remember going back to the party and he didn't remember having broken glasses or scratches. And as anyone with glasses can tell you, a broken lens is certainly not a big deal. You don't have to get them replaced or anything.
I just keep wearing it.
You already told a different detective that you were in a scuffle, so just stick to that at least instead of just, no, I don't remember that. So ridiculous. The detectives didn't let him off quite as easy as the 77 crew did. When Dennis pulled the, "Welp, I don't remember that," they pushed back. When they told him that they knew he had gone to the house, returned to the party, and had those injuries, he once again basically confessed, saying, "Oh my God, could I have done this? I probably did do this. In fact, based upon what you're telling me, I have no reason to believe that you would lie to me. You've convinced me that I did do this." Dennis claimed that he had no memory of what he had done or what had occurred after leaving Miss Foster's home, saying he probably did do this, but unless I can remember, I can't confess. During that same interview, photographs of Dennis, along with blood, head, and pubic hair samples, were taken via a warrant. He was never arrested or charged with any crime related to Terry's murder. Terry's brother, Tim, was never pleased with how the Vancouver police handled his sister's murder case. He spoke with police when it first occurred. Then, 10 years later, when someone called to say that they were still working on it and they had even gone to California to interview a suspect, which I'm assuming this is a reference to Dennis David in Chico. Tim was promised that there would be more contact, especially since it was implied that an indictment would be coming soon, but he never heard anything. It was June 2010 when the newest detective assigned to Terry's case met with Millie, Terry's mother, and her brother Tim. The detective updated them on the case, saying evidence was being sent in for advanced testing now that technology was catching up to their needs. That same detective told Tim that so far nothing was coming back from the labs and that there might not ever be an answer because of, quote, issues with the initial investigation that may be difficult to overcome. So don't worry about dusting off the good old police bell here. I mentioned Terry's half-brother James in the first episode and how his clingy behavior had several family members concerned. Tim was one of those family members. Tim found James's relationship with Terry odd and uncomfortable, especially considering his criminal past. Part of what initiated the 2010 conversation between Tim and the detective was a recent conviction. Michael Allen Hirsch had been found guilty of the 1978 murder of Norma Simmerly. This was after he was already serving time for an attack on Joy Fletcher in 1978 and second-degree assault in 1985 for attacking a prison guard. He was given 33 years for the murder of Norma Simmerly. The murder of Norma, and there's obviously a ton of story there, so this is probably going to be its own episode. Emily, you should look into it. It's all DNA related. It was similar to Terry, kind of only in time and location. Norma was stabbed and beaten in her own home, which was Hirsch's MO, not strangled and raped and dumped outside. But it was hard for Tim to see a difference. For him, Michael Allen Hirsch should have been looked at as a suspect as he was an active killer in the area at the time. It is not known if the police ever looked into Michael Hirsch. Okay, let's look at some evidence. In January 1978, evidence taken from Terry was examined and tested. No blood was found in her fingernail scrapings. There was a pubic hair located that was not a match for Terry. Blood was found on Terry's sweater, but it matched her type, so it was believed to have been hers, possibly due to the facial beating she had sustained. Hair, soil, cannabis, and an unknown white deposit were also found on her sweater. Later testing would show the DNA from the collar of the sweater was a mix, and Dennis David could not be excluded as a contributor. A contributor to the other DNA in the vaginal swab was not the same as the sweater. Most of the items recovered from Terry's body were saved as evidence to be tested. This included her jean jacket, socks, sweater, bra, and purse. The latter was tested several times, but no DNA was ever recovered, nor were there fingerprints on the purse or a package of smokes and other garbage that was found near her body, including a milk carton, beer cans, a beer bottle, and a magazine. In 1986, when new testing was done, it was found that there was no spermatozoa in one of Terry's vaginal secretion samples. In 1988, additional evidence was sent to the Washington State Police Lab for testing. That report found that the single pubic hair was microscopically dissimilar from Terry's. However, it was also not found to be a match for Dennis David. The conversation with Tim inspired detectives to look into additional evidence that could be tested. That detective found pieces of evidence suitable for testing. They were 2 vials of blood from Dennis David, a head and pubic hair from him as well, vaginal and urine samples of Terry, head and pubic hair from Terry, her fingernail scrapings, 13 glass slides of hairs, and her long-sleeved shirt. Testing all of that evidence found a trace amount of DNA from a fingernail scraping, and the vaginal swab was found to have the potential for further DNA testing. Some of the samples were so small and the technology was nearly 20 years older than today that there was approval from prosecution and investigators that the lab could consume the sample, as in the testing that they would need to do would destroy the remaining sample, making it unavailable for testing should technology advance before the case was closed. Because there were no active criminal charges, everyone gave their blessing and much of the physical evidence was lost to those tests. Additional testing found that the white stain on her jacket originated from a single male source that was not Dennis David. Now, I have no idea what this stain could be because it sounds like it would be semen, but the report states no blood, semen, or saliva was located on Terry Foster's jacket.
And it was white. Dandruff?
Yeah, and it's not, and I thought, okay, well, if it's not semen, maybe it's saliva, like, a loogie or something. No.
I'm going to go with dandruff. Like, goopy dandruff.
Goopy dandruff. Well, I do believe it's known for its goopiness, not being dry.
I mean, what else could it be?
I don't know.
Oh, like eye goobers?
Sweat? Not sweat?
Oh, yeah, it could be sweat because then it dries white like salt.
What? Oh, maybe.
Yeah, that's a really good guess.
Okay, that might be the only other option because it's making me crazy what that could be.
Yeah, I think that's a
oh, yeah, so if it's the jacket, because if they're above her, if they're holding her down and it drips. And my gosh, you did it.
It does dry white on a lot of times.
And who knows if you've been drinking. I don't know if that changes it, if that would make it saltier or.
You might sweat more.
That's got to be it. Good job. Because I'm like, how are you testing for DNA if it's not
I'm going to go with
things?
Mine, dandruff.
I like goopy dandruff as well. And that's why they pay us the big bucks.
I'll call them crimes left and right.
Dear detective, did you ever consider goopy dandruff? DNA was found on Terry's wallet, but it was mixed with at least 4 sources. Dennis David was neither one of them nor the originator of the white stain. Outsourcing testing to a more advanced lab in 2009, a YSTR profile, or DNA profile of a man, was obtained from the non-sperm fraction DNA extract of the vaginal swabs. Dennis David was not a match. However, a partial YSTR profile was obtained from the sperm portion, and Dennis David could not be excluded from that. I don't know how much physical evidence still exists or if any of it is salvageable for additional testing, but for everyone's sake, I hope that there's at least something.
And it was the age of the evidence that lowered the...
Yeah, so at that time, we're talking almost 40 years, and things have been tested, so you have even less to work with. So even though the technology is advanced, I don't know that it was that advanced. So, yeah, and it's a bunch of yes and no. So it's like, I don't know that him not being a match for the vaginal swab is...
That's why I brought it up. I don't think it's really...
Yeah, it reminds me a little of Homer Jackson.
Proves him out of it.
The guy that was doing time for all the sex workers. And it's like, well, he was excluded and also not excluded. So how can you say that? So we'll talk about it a little, but I think there's a lot of weight on the evidence. And I don't know that that's it. I think it's more, hey, could we talk to the guy that keeps confessing and just get him to confess all the way or whatever needs to happen? So there you have it, the unsolved story of Terry Lee Foster of Vancouver, Washington. In my personal opinion, my eyes are on Dennis David. I have a sneaking suspicion charges didn't come for several reasons. As the detective mentioned, the initial investigation was mishandled in some way, probably several, hindering the ability to charge anyone. There wasn't physical evidence then, and what there is now isn't enough to charge. I don't know that Dennis David being included or excluded from samples proves all that much. It's not unheard of for rapists to wear condoms, even if this was before DNA times. So Terry could have had intercourse with someone else that, she wanted to. It was the night of the Christmas party. She went out to the bar. Like, who knows? So I don't know that it all holds that power as much as it does in other cases. And we all know by now that DNA heavily influences juries. A defense lawyer would have a heyday with all of the different mixtures and exclusions. And if Dennis was to be charged, he could probably walk. His multiple confessions of, yeah, I don't remember, but I probably did it, wouldn't have helped the case, though. Then there's Dennis Manning, the ex-boyfriend, who was also so drunk that night he wasn't sure if he had gone to Terry's home at 1 a.m. There's Kenneth Haynes, who was fostering Terry's daughter at the time. He would go on to be a convicted pedophile, having abused Fawn. Did he want to keep Fawn for his own? Did Terry confront him that night about wanting her back? It could be possible. Then there's Kevin and Sam. They were a newly formed criminal pair and were some of the last to be with Terry. Sam would also go on to have several convictions regarding drunk driving and indecent liberties. Kevin Scarico passed away in 2014. He was just 55 years old. With all of this information, there is one question remaining. Who killed Terry Lee Foster on Christmas Eve, 1977, after she left her home on foot at 2:30 a.m.? Was it one of the men I've talked about? Was it someone else she knew? Was it a random act of violence brought on by an opportunity like hitchhiking? After her mother's death, Fawn stayed in contact with her grandmother, Millie, who lived long enough to watch her granddaughter graduate and get married. I've searched high and low for Millie's info, and it's very possible that she is still alive at 98 years old. If so, wouldn't it be incredible if we could get her daughter's case some traction and give her these answers before she passes away? And even if she is already gone, Terry's remaining loved ones deserve those answers too. I reached out to the person that I believe is Fawn on Facebook. I've yet to hear back, which is more than understandable. But if I do, I will definitely let everyone know. I also reached out to the assigned detective for Terry's case, asking for any pieces of information I could share with the public. Their response was that it is active. And if you could shoot us an email, Gmail us, murderintherain@gmail.com. If you could explain to me why cold case detectives can't give just the most basic information to get the public's help,
I agree.
I would really appreciate that.
How is there not a media kit for that?
I don't know. I fully understand that it's an active case, and there is only so much you can say.
But with every case, there's something you can say.
There's got to be something
without giving away too many
if
details.
you look her up, This is how I found Gary Hughes. He's the only other person to have covered her case. The only thing that comes up is the Vancouver cold case page, and it literally is a sentence.
It's because understaffing, they don't have full-time people on it. Like, they'll have every excuse in the book, but there should be a quick media kit for people
Something.
to be able to share it and keep the word out.
And I'm not saying I'm owed that or give me every piece of info you've got, because like I wouldn't have gotten these documents. I'm not
Sure.
I'm not even asking Gary how he got but it's like you really can't. I'm not only trying to get the info out to get them info to work on their case, but something to pique people's interest.
Mhm.
It's an almost 50-year-old case, and you're running out of time to be able to bring justice to anybody.
Or to get a new tip.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to do something to keep it stirred up so
Yeah.
that people maintain an interest. And a complete blackout is not that.
Yeah, so I don't understand why one sentence on a cold case page is sufficient to be like, if you know anything
Well, it's
about
not.
the
And
Christmas Eve murder.
I don't think anyone would defend that it is.
Right.
But they have to prioritize their work.
Yeah.
And if we're not going to invest money to have dedicated resources on
Yeah.
cold cases, that's how it's going to be.
Yeah, that's true.
That kind of feels like less than the bare minimum. to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, it's always shocking. That's happened every time. I've never had a detective say, "Oh my gosh, thank you for getting the word out. We're desperate for tips. Could you make sure that you know that
I have.
this is the most important part?" You have?
Well, with the Kimberly Kersey case,
Oh,
I
right,
had two
right.
detectives willing to talk to me. So I think
Right.
it just depends.
Yeah, because I've got another one. Someone had come into the house. This was a couple years ago, and they're like, "Have you ever heard of this case?" Da, da, da. And I dug and dug and dug, and I found one little snippet,
It's
and I
so
found two
hard.
things in the newspaper about it. But I was able to track down somebody working on it, and they put me through to the PR guy. And now the PR guy is like, "We're not talking to you." And
That's-
I have bugged him. I've probably sent him
Ugh.
20 emails being like, "Hey, we're doing True Crime Tuesday. Can you give me 1 minute worth of
Nobody's
information?"
here to try to ruin your case. Like, give me a break.
Because with that one, it's like a young woman was found. I don't even know if she was in high school yet. So like a young girl was found out in Sandy, and she was murdered and left out, I think in a ditch or something. And there's two snippets, and there is nothing else that exists. And I think I have told them in one of those emails, you know what this looks like. This looks like a cover up. This looks like you know who did it, or perhaps it was in house,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why you're not giving anything.
That's a really good point. There's some shady crap that happened
Yeah.
in especially the 80s and 90s.
And it's really shocking when it's these old cases like Terry's, where it's, can I get enough to be able to tell, like True Crime Tuesday, I need a paragraph. You're not going to confirm info with me or say, we have one suspect, but we can't do anything, or make sure you have the right details for the
Yeah.
date and location.
It's really sad.
Anything.
I just imagine all these cases that are eventually just going to be forgotten and not closed.
I think that's part of the hope is, be quiet, go away. And they hope for the same thing for the case, that it'll just go away. But
luckily, podcasts are around to poke holes in things
Exactly.
and keep their numbers
exactly.
looking shitty.
Yeah.
Close those cases? No way.
Yeah. So anyway, so if anyone knows the reason, I'm sure Emily's on the right track, that they just don't have time. It's like, I got to answer this email right now. It's active. Leave me alone.
From all the detectives I've talked to in the Pacific Northwest, it is on a volunteer basis, or they have one dedicated resource, or it's retired detectives offering their time in their spare time. Like, I have this set of skills and I'm going to offer it. It really is based on the people willing to dedicate time rather than actually resourcing for it.
Right. Which is nuts. Well, thank you for your input on that.
That's what we're here for.
If you know anything about the Christmas Eve rape and strangulation death of 21-year-old Terry Lee Foster, whose half-nude body was discovered in David Douglas Park in Vancouver, Washington, 1977, you are asked to contact Corporal Neil Martin at 360-487-7423, or you can email him at neil.martin@cityofvancouver.us. As always, no matter how much time has passed, someone knows something. Were you at the Edelweiss party? Maybe people were taking pictures at that party. Maybe you knew Terry outside of work. You were familiar with Dennis David or any of the possible suspects, or you know something about them from that time. Maybe you are the person responsible and you don't want to carry the weight of the secret to your grave. That last bit of information could solve a cold case and possibly bring justice to this young mother. and I hope it all made sense. I'm sorry for all the names.
It will be actually good for me to listen back to it. I'm sure it will make more sense. You know, it's like instead of names, I just kind of give everyone a color in my head.
Yeah.
Just try to
Their
keep
little
it
character.
straight. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is complicated. And I can see, again, back in the 70s, it's hard to remember how limited technology was.
Oh, yeah. Everything's handwritten.
Yeah. And you don't just pull up.
Barely a fax machine to be
Yeah,
found.
right?
Now you can hardly find one. I had to go to FedEx to
Oh my
fax
God,
something.
how embarrassing.
They were requesting credit card information via text to pay for the certification. And I'm like,
No.
what kind of
Scammerino.
No, it's the HVAC industry. They're like
Still.
stuck in the 90s.
That's not okay.
That's crazy. Crazy town. Anyway.
Yeah. So if anyone has any clarifying questions, feel free to email me and I will answer
She will
them.
draw you a diagram and send you a video on a whiteboard.
That's right. And for more visuals, obviously we'll have them on our blog, but be sure to check out Gary Hughes Investigates on YouTube. He pulled up all the maps and kind of
we can embed his video into
Oh, that'd
our
be great.
blog.
Yeah, I think it's like 2.5 hours long or something.
Well,
and
if you need something to do,
right,
check out our blog.
Everyone can become an expert in this case. You've got maps and
I'm
just
picturing
how
that
close
meme
everything is.
of the guy in front of the whiteboard.
Yes,
with the
that's
red...
how it feels. And that's also what I picture, back to the 70s. It's like, that's what it was. It wasn't like you could just sit there and say, well, here's this person's Facebook and I can keep them straight. Here's a photo and where they work.
Yeah, they
and all
had
that.
it on a whiteboard.
They
or
just
corkboard.
wrote Dennis, Sam, potatoes, gravy, green beans. Like, it was just,
I'm hungry.
it was too many people. So for that, I understand the confusion.
Well,
back in the
thank
day.
you for breaking it down for us so
Yeah.
we could try to keep
I
keep
hope
alongside
so.
you.
You guys just listen over and over and over.
You'll get it. Yeah, we'll take the downloads. If you're going to do that, though,
Go on
check out
different
a different
devices.
streaming app.
Listen on your computer.
Listen, we're back after a big hiatus. We need your help to get listeners now,
That's
okay?
right.
Come back to us, please.
Come back.
Come
We
back.
miss you.
We'll bring you cases. And hey, if you've submitted a suggestion for a case, just know that we keep track of them.
Yes, we have a file called
very long
Submitted
one.
Cases, and it's so long.
It is long, and some of them, though, there's just not enough information. Others there is, and will likely get to your case.
Yes, definitely.
Keep them coming.
Welcome back. Like,
I
make
know.
eye contact.
I
with
mean,
them.
I hardly had tits, and I'll like. Well, now I do, but so I can't hide them. They're there, but
Right.
like people stare no matter what. You
Yeah.
have tits, you don't. They stare.
And I'm like, well, I'd like to just be able to sit comfortably in a movie theater seat and
So you
airplane.
have. I don't know what your
People
recovery- did
also
you-
stare at my breasts.
In addition to all of that damning, yet not concrete. Dennis would. Dennis. The detectives then discussed the night of the 23rd, 1927. 27? You stupid. Yeah, it could have been. I'll take that again. Interestingly,
Triplet language.
After the convention, arriving at that location,
If he had just fired in the pattern that he learned from the SOS commercials.
pop, 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 pop. And much of the physical evidence was lost to those tests. Murder in the Rain is a Cascade Media production, written, hosted, and edited by Josh McCullough, Emily Rowney, and Alicia Holland. Feel free to email us at murderintherain@gmail.com or through our website, murderintherain.com. For as little as $1 a month, you can subscribe on Patreon to get exclusive access to ad-free and older episodes. For only $5, you can access Patreon-exclusive episodes and content. For more of us, be sure to follow on all the socials, listen to Josh and Alicia on their other show, Always Be My Sisters, and follow Emily on TikTok at @M_murderintherain. And suck my balls.